All right, well, today I'm excited to talk with you about the Eclipse principle and the impact it has on relationships everywhere. So I'm going to talk to you about what this principle means, how it affects couples, how couples kind of get into this Eclipse principle, and things that you can do to avoid being eclipsed in your relationship. So stay tuned. So when we talk about the eclipse principle, you can think about this in the same manner in which the moon can end up eclipsing the sun. So we know that the sun is ginormously bigger than the moon. It's not even close. And yet, the moon positioning itself between the earth and the sun can literally block our view of the sun completely for a few moments. Right? And that's because of this eclipse principle, the idea that the moon, even though it's much smaller than the sun, is much closer to our view from our perspective here on Earth. And as a result of that proximity, how close the moon is to the sun, it can literally start to drown out, block out all the light of the sun when it's positioned just in the right manner. And the same happens in our relationships, and here's how. So a couple, they get together typically because there's good chemistry between them, right? So both parties are feeling chemistry that is kind of that X factor that draws us closer to one another, makes us interested in each other, makes us want to get to know each other. It's that law of attraction, right? That chemistry draws us together. And then the second reason is because there's things about this person, separate from this chemistry thing that we're feeling, that is enticing to us, that are inviting to us, that draw us closer to one another because we find those things good or beautiful about one another, right? So both these principles, kind of the attributes that draw us to each other, as well as that kind of X factor chemistry that pull us together, right? And so a couple typically has this, and they have this strongly at the beginning of their relationship, right? Their focus on the things that are good about one another is extremely high. And it's what creates this kind of falling in love experience, right? This feeling of being drawn toward and connected to you, even so strong that the couples will choose to spend their life with one another because these factors are so big, both these attributes that I really appreciate about you, as well as this kind of chemistry X factor that makes me drawn towards you, right? So a couple typically has this really strongly in the beginning of their relationship. And a big part of what's happening is there's a large focus on all the things that are good about my partner. They are the thing that are closest to my view, right? So I was working with a couple a while back, and as I worked with this couple, they were falling victim to this eclipse principle, and they were falling victim to it 5 years into their relationship. At the beginning of their relationship, just like I explained to you, they were feeling really connected. And here's some of the things that he really appreciated about her. He loved her loyalty, right? So when we talk about these attributes, they already had strong chemistry, right? They felt chemistry for one another that kind of pulled them together initially, made them interested in getting to know each other better. And as he got to know her better, she was very loyal. And this means a lot to him. This meant a lot to him because he had been through relationships where there wasn't as much loyalty and love in the relationships. And she was very faithful, very committed to the relationship and building a relationship with him. She also appreciated that she was adventurous. She enjoyed trying new things. And as a result of that, she would try out motocross riding with him. She would go on hikes with him, canoeing with him. He really enjoyed being in the outdoors, and she was into that. She was very, very much into trying new things, and he really appreciated that about her personality and her attributes. She was service focused, and he liked that about her, that she would often look for opportunities to not only serve him, but serve others in the community. She was very focused on others, and he loved that giving aspect of her. She's kind and generous, in her relationship, very thoughtful in her interaction with him. And this was refreshing because his previous relationships oftentimes kind of overlooked what he would bring to the table and didn't really consider him much in the day-to-day interactions of the relationship. But she was very much service focused. She was intelligent. So he loved that he could have a deep conversation with her, philosophical conversation with her. She was educated and intelligent, which was attractive to him. She's beautiful, so she wasn't hard on the eyes, and he really appreciated that, being around her. She took care of herself physically. She was athletic and would invest in herself physically, and he was drawn to her beauty. She loved his family, and that was really important. There's a lot of contention in his previous relationships between the individuals that he was dating and his family. And she seemed to get along great. She was kind and generous and thoughtful, all these qualities that we talked about before with his family, and that meant a lot to him. She was ambitious and driven, so she had a career. She was trained and skilled and certified in her talents and in her gifts, and that showed up in her career. She had a desire to be able to make good money for herself and support herself as a single person. And he could see her wanting to continue to do some of that in their relationship. And that drive was exciting to him. He appreciated that drive. And then, of course, she was in a situation that she was willing to dedicate a lot of time and energy around his preferences. So she was willing to make room for him in her life. And that meant a lot to him to feel like he had a space and a place of priority in her world. So all these things added up, right? Like you're going down through this list and you're like, man, what a catch. What a great opportunity for not only a dating relationship, but maybe long-term spouse relationship. He could really see himself spending his life with this person. And as a result, he ended up putting a ring on it and he married her. And they had a great experience for the first couple of years of their marriage. He really appreciated her kindness, her generosity, her adventurousness, right? The way in which she'd create adventurousness. I don't even know if that's a word. Her sense of adventure, the way that she would dedicate time and attention to him, the manner in which she was considerate and prioritized him, her beauty remained, right? And her drive. Watching her kind of grow and progress in her career. He really loved all of these things and continued to feel like he got himself a really great catch. The chemistry was good, and all of these attributes he really appreciated about her. And as he was focused on these attributes, he just was madly in love with her, right? Well, over time, there were a few quirks and issues that came up in the relationship that he didn't love so much. And one of the main ones is she wasn't as social as he is. So she did okay in small crowds, in small groups, family get-togethers, or work kind of colleague situations where she had kind of a small intimate group. She was kind, generous, social, easy to talk to. But when it came to larger groups, he enjoyed having big get-togethers with family and friends, where he would pull in 30, 40 people and have a barbecue, right? Or watch a football game. These types of events, she didn't shine in so much. She was a little bit introverted for those situations and would kind of fade out into the back. She didn't love them. And it wasn't something she was excited about. She supported them because she loved him. And so she would support him in pulling these activities off, but they weren't her favorite. And she often wasn't very social at these events. She could be found kind of in the corner in the back room, kind of helping clean up and manage, but she wasn't as outgoing and social as he wanted her to be. And that bothered him. And she didn't love doing these big activities, these large group activities, and that bothered him. And so they started to have a few arguments about that, where he was disappointed that she wasn't more excited and motivated to do these big social things that he loved so much, and that she didn't want to do them as often as he loved doing them. So that started to be kind of an issue in their relationship. Another thing that started to develop is he started to feel like she was kind of clingy. Clingy is the way that he described it, right? So she was concerned when he wanted to spend significant time away with golf or adventure trips with some of his buddies, some backpacking trips and things. She missed him when he would do that. And sometimes they had arguments about how frequently he wanted to do those things and how often he was outside of the home, spending time with friends or family on some of these adventures. And he appreciated her adventurousness. That's adventure, her adventurous nature, which is part of the reason that they got together in the first place. But now this was starting to get frustrating for him because he could feel tension with her as he'd be planning another one of these things that didn't involve her. Going out with a group of guys, going out with his brothers, going out with his dad, things like that. And it created arguments. It created frustration in their relationship. He felt like she was too clingy, that she wanted to spend too much time with him. And by the way, you ought to know that as we did some work together, we discovered that one of her primary languages of love is quality of time. Quality time is big for her in feeling love and connected. And it's part of what the tension was that he was feeling. Right, like this tension when he would bring up one of these activities and they would have an argument. Part of that is because she found a lot of fulfillment and love in spending quality time together and offering acts of service to one another. And so that was starting to become an issue. And then finally he started to realize as the relationship continued that she could be quite defensive and she could be quite sensitive when he would try to give her feedback. So he'd be in these conflicts with her, and in his family, people were pretty direct in a conflict. If you had an issue, you'd bring it up, you'd state it quite directly to your partner, and she would become very defensive very quickly. She would sometimes lash out in return, say some mean things or yell or get upset. Or she'd withdraw. She'd go silent. And sometimes that silence would go for 12 hours, 24 hours, that they wouldn't talk, that she would kind of withdraw in these places. And he didn't love that. He didn't find that attractive, her defensiveness. And that became an issue in their relationship. So we started to run into these things, right? Her clingy kind of nature, her defensiveness, the way in which she wasn't as socially outgoing as he wanted her to be. And as he started to run into these things, more and more in the relationship, he started to focus on them. They started to be the things that he thought about most in the relationship, right? They started to eclipse all the other good about her, right? The driven aspects of her, the kindness and generosity aspects of her, the selflessness, the loyalty, the intelligence, the beauty, right? All these items that he fell in love with in the beginning, they started to fade more in the back. He started to take them for granted, which is easy for us to do when we've been in a relationship with somebody for a while, right? Those things that are common about them, right? They're common attributes about them. Just like with her, the beauty, the intelligence, the kindness, the service focus, the loyalty, right? Like the willingness to prioritize him, the ambition, right? All these things are common about her. And because they're common about her, they start to be a common experience in the relationship for him. And when they start to be common, it's easy for him to start to treat them as commonplace, right? Like to forget that these are beautiful and unique and desirable attributes in his partner that are part of the reasons that he fell in love with her. He starts to take them for granted. And as he takes them for granted, they fade back a little bit in his focus in the relationship. They're normal for him. And because they're normal for him, they don't really stand out so much for him, right? It's easy to just take all those things for granted. But what starts to stand out more for him over time are these things that he's bothered by. She's not as social as he'd love for her to be. She's a little bit sensitive and defensive with him, right? And she can be clingy sometimes, in his words, right? And as a result of that, not liking these things, right, being frustrated with these things, they start to come closer and closer to his view. He starts to notice those attributes of her much more than that positive list I shared. And as a result of that, they get closer and closer to his view. He even starts to look for those in the relationship and sometimes even anticipates her defensiveness or anticipates her clinginess before it even occurs. In fact, sometimes there might be an event coming up in their relationship with each other, that he'll anticipate that she's going to have tension about it. She's going to be frustrated about this event, and he won't even communicate about it until the very last minute, because he's just sure that she's going to be frustrated, there's going to be some tension, and then they're going to end up in a defensive argument, right? So he's spending much more emotional space and mental space in the relationship preoccupied on these few small things that, as he gives them time and attention and focus, become bigger and bigger in the relationship, right? So just like you're looking at me, if I have an issue here that I'm talking to you about, you can see all of me and you can see the small issue. But if that small issue starts to become between us and starts to be the primary focus of you in your relationship with me, pretty soon I go away. Pretty soon all you see is that issue, right? And if that issue is clingy, or if that issue is not social enough or defensive, pretty soon it's easy for him to forget about all the good that she is, right? That whole package that he originally fell in love with. She's the same woman. She's not a different person today than she was before. He's just gotten to know her better. And so some of the good he's gotten to know better, and some of the pieces that he doesn't love so much he's gotten to know better as well. And as a result of that, that eclipse principle can start to kick in. So it's normal for couples to have things about one another that we don't love, right? Like it's normal for there to be a few things that we wish were different about our partner. And unfortunately, there is no such thing as a perfect partner, and there's no such thing as a perfect marriage. And there doesn't have to be for a couple to have joy, right? What needs to happen is we need to be intentional about where we focus in the relationship. We want to work on those things that are tough, and it's good. It's good for this couple to talk about the issues with the social situations, right? And the defensiveness, to try to figure out a different way to communicate past the defensiveness, to try to figure out how he can fulfill her love needs in the quality time and acts of services places, instead of being so frustrated at her clinginess, right? So it's good for them to work through these things, and these are some things that they may work on most of their relationship. In fact, these are things that may never become completely his ideal preference at any point in the marriage. They might always be a thing that he practices patience with and creates some room for imperfection, right? So that's fine, and we don't have to have a perfect relationship in order to have a fulfilled relationship. But what we want to be careful about is that these things, right, her clinginess, her defensiveness, and her disinterest in being as social as he would like to be, those things are not reasons that should outweigh all of the good about her in the relationship. And they won't if he puts them on an equal scale, right? If he considers often all the good she brings to the table while he's considering those few issues that kind of drive him bonkers, he'll realize that he still has a great spouse and a great companion. In fact, a tremendous one that he ought to be grateful for every day of his life, and spend most of his energy focused on loving and appreciating and thanking and cherishing her for her willingness to spend her life with him. She's a great gift and a great asset when he considers all of her, right? But when he only considers 2 or 3 parts of her, it's easy for those 2 or 3 parts to come between them in such a way that it eclipses his view of her. And all he can then see is how clingy she can be, how defensive she can be, and how she's not as social as he'd love for her to be. And when that's all he can see, he can then start to, in his mind and in his heart, wish, maybe even regret, that he didn't find somebody more social, right? Less defensive, and somebody that didn't cling to him as much, which is kind of ironic, because if he were with that person, he would probably be frustrated and irritated, maybe even sensitive himself, defensive himself, that she was fine without him more often, because there's something that is super flattering about somebody wanting to be with you often, right? But he can't have a chance to experience that yet, because he's too preoccupied with what a frustration it is. So if he's not careful, he could take those three things, those three small pieces of all of who she is, and use them to drown out all the good that she is, to the point of talking himself out of a relationship with her, only to go out and try to find somebody who has strengths in those three areas, and then start to find that he's missing many of the other areas that she brought to the table as an asset, right? Because the issue in the beginning of their relationship wasn't that she was unlovable, and it wasn't that she was a different person, and it wasn't that there weren't more good about her than negatives, right? He fell in love with this person. The difference now is he stopped focusing as much on all that she is and started focusing on the few things that she's not. And when we do that in a relationship, we're at risk for talking ourselves out of a beautiful connection, right? There will always be a few things that we're working on as spouses in a marriage. There's no such thing as a perfect relationship. So your goal is to stay focused just as equally, if not more, on all the good your spouse is, to help offset the small things, to keep in perspective the few small things that you don't love so much, that are harder for you to love, right? And when you do that, you can work on those small things over time. You can refine those things with each other, grow those things over time, and not have to wait for those things to be absent or gone in order to have great fulfillment, because the fulfillment comes from a remembering of all the good that we both bring to the table, and why we continue to choose love, and why we chose love in the beginning, right? So that's the Eclipse principle. Let's keep those small things in perspective. Let's keep them where they belong, which is in the shadows of all the great things about our partner. And let's spend a majority of our time celebrating the good, recognizing the good, remembering the good, right? Prizing the good. Let's spend a majority of our time focused on Thanksgiving there, and spend just a little bit of time on a regular basis working on the pieces that we want to continue to refine. Couples who learn to do that with one another, both keeping these small things in perspective, stay out of the eclipse, right? They're able to bask in the joy of the good much more often in the relationship. And that's what we want for your relationship, okay? So that's your challenge. Right now, I'd love for you to just pause for a minute and write down a list of all the things that you likely take for granted about your partner, that you fell in love with about them, that are still true about them, but they're probably getting a lot less focus, a lot less attention, and a lot less appreciation from you in the relationship now, right? So make a list of all those things that you might take for granted. And then next to it, you can put the one or two or three small things that are difficult for you about the relationship, to kind of hold in perspective this Eclipse principle. And then my challenge to you is to celebrate those, to appreciate those, to give thanks for those, to verbally compliment and communicate appreciation often for what your spouse is in your life, and continue to work on healthier ways to communicate and work through the pieces that you're not loving as much, that are harder to love about your spouse, but keeping them in perspective to all the good. Now, some of you, as you listen to this, might say, over time, my spouse has changed, right? They don't do all these things that they used to do that make it harder for me to appreciate the good, right? And this is a very common, in fact, we'll do a video about this, but this is a very common cycle that can happen. We call it a feedback loop. And in this situation, it's a destructive feedback loop, right? That as you appreciate your partner less, they're less inclined to step up in really positive ways in the relationship. They're more preoccupied with the lack of appreciation that they're feeling. So they stop doing as much as they might normally do, as their tendency might be, because they're feeling appreciated less. And as they do less, it's easier for me to scrutinize them, criticize them, and create a bigger list of those things I don't love about the relationship, which makes that Eclipse principle easier for me to do, because there's more negative than I'm experiencing, which means I appreciate less, which means they might do less, and round and round and round we go, right? Over time, I have less to feel appreciative of, because they're doing less in the relationship. And they might be doing less because I'm recognizing and noticing less, right? So we have these feedback loops, and I'll do a video on this at some point here in the future to talk about that principle. And you might be falling into some of that. There might be some truth to that. But again, even if you are in that spot, my challenge to you is to break that cycle by starting to yourself bring back some of you that your partner fell in love with, which is likely the parts of you that were kind and made them feel good, made them feel loved, right? That was willing to compliment, willing to go out of your way to prioritize them, to be patient with them, to encourage them, to support them, right? It's likely that if you're experiencing less of those things from your partner, you're probably doing less of those things yourself as well. And so you can break this cycle by stepping up into this appreciating place once more, right? So that's my challenge to you. Make a list of all the things you likely take for granted, the things that are so common about them, you allow them to become commonplace for you. Make that list, right? Hold those issues that are concerns for you in comparison to that list, and make sure that a majority of your focus each day is on the prizing and appreciating. And I'm excited to see what that kind of focus can do for your relationship. Okay, so if you haven't checked it out yet, we have a video module called the Remember module. And it goes into more detail about this principle. It talks about the lens that we can start to operate through when we lose focus of the good in our partner, and when we start to only focus on the hurtful. So that Remember module is a good one. The Advanced Communication module and the Whole module are excellent ones for communication strategies. So check those ones out too, right? They're helpful as you're trying to have those conversations with each other that sometimes go critical and defensive. These are really helpful training modules to help you walk through those. I hope you have a wonderful day. I hope this content is helpful for you. Please continue to support us by liking and subscribing. If you know a couple that could benefit from some of these principles, it doesn't hurt to share it with them, right? This is free content that we want to just put out there to the world to help couples everywhere thrive. We'll talk to you soon.